Cursed Omega abandoned by family. The Alpha King claimed the fated mate. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character, Sarah Whitlock, the Cursed Omega. Sarah Whitlock, once a young girl full of dreams and hopes, was now nothing more than a shadow of her former self. Abandoned by her family, she lived a life filled with pain and rejection. An Omega, born into a world where strength and power ruled, she was weak, unable to shift into her wolf form, a constant reminder of her inadequacy. Her family had turned their backs on her, deeming her useless, and in a society that prized power above all else, Sarah was nothing but an outcast. The whispers followed her everywhere, cursed, broken, unworthy. Each day, the weight of those words crushed her spirit a little more. Her father, the proud alpha of the Whitlock pack, had disowned her when she failed to shift at the proper age. Her mother, distant and cold, had never shown her the affection Sarah craved. The only comfort she found was in the solace of the forest, where no one could judge her. The trees, the soft rustling leaves, and the whispers of the wind were the only things that made her feel alive. Yet, even here, Sarah couldn't escape her own thoughts. She was alone, always alone. Her heart longed for a connection, for someone to see her beyond the curse, beyond her failure. But it seemed hopeless. That was until one fateful night, when Sarah stumbled upon a creature in the woods, injured and weak. She approached cautiously, her heart racing. The creature, a massive wolf, lay crumpled in the moonlight, its fur matted with blood. Sarah's heart ached for it, just as it ached for herself. She knelt beside the beast, her hands trembling as she gently touched its fur. It let out a soft whimper, and Sarah's chest tightened. Without thinking, she began to heal it, using the only gift she had, her empathy. She poured every ounce of her energy into the wolf, her hands glowing faintly in the moonlight. She didn't know why, but it felt right. She could feel the creature's pain, its suffering, and in return, it seemed to offer her a sense of peace, a moment of relief from her own misery. As she finished, the wolf slowly began to stir, its golden eyes meeting hers in the dim light. But there was something more, something that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. This was no ordinary wolf. The creature's gaze was far too intelligent, too piercing. It was then that Sarah realized. She hadn't just saved any wolf. She had healed the Alpha King. Alpha King Alexander Thornridge, the powerful and ruthless ruler of the Northern Territories, had been in hiding, cursed by a dark magic that had ravaged his soul and transformed him into something he no longer recognized. His curse had kept him isolated, hidden from the world. Until now, as Alexander's wolf form faded, his true identity was revealed. His golden eyes softened as he looked at Sarah, and for the first time in years, a spark of hope flickered in his chest. He had found her, the one he had been searching for, the one he was destined to claim. Sarah Whitlock, the Cursed Omega, had healed him, and now she was his. The bond had been sealed, and Sarah's life, once filled with nothing but despair, had changed forever. But Sarah couldn't know what awaited her. She couldn't yet understand the power she had awakened in him, in herself. The Alpha King had claimed her as his mate, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days were a blur for Sarah. She had never felt so lost, and yet so alive all at once. Alpha King Alexander had claimed her, and she was struggling to understand what that truly meant. Her world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. The once lonely and abandoned Omega was now bound to the most powerful man in the land. But with that power came uncertainty. Would he truly want her, or was this just a momentary connection? The doubt gnawed at her. She had been treated as invisible her whole life, and now, suddenly, she was the center of attention. Alexander, in his quiet way, seemed to be watching her, observing every move she made. His golden eyes never left her, and whenever their gazes met, a strange warmth spread through her chest. But Sarah couldn't help but feel out of place. She had never belonged to such a powerful world. The life she had known, of being an outcast, was all she had ever understood. Now, She had to learn to fit into a role she hadn't asked for. That night, Sarah sat by the fire in the large stone hall of the castle, Alexander's presence looming in the background. The flames crackled, casting shadows across the room, and yet, she felt cold. She had always loved the simplicity of nature, the peaceful quiet of the forest. But here, in the castle, the silence felt different, heavy with unspoken words, with secrets. As she stared into the flames, trying to make sense of it all, Alexander's voice broke through the stillness. Sarah. His voice was deep, steady, but there was something softer in it now, something that made her heart flutter against her ribs. She turned to face him, and for a brief moment, she saw the king, the ruler who commanded respect from everyone around him. But there was something else in his gaze now, something vulnerable. "You've been quiet," he said, taking a step closer. "Is something troubling you?" Sarah hesitated, unsure of how to answer. The truth was, she didn't know what to feel. She wasn't sure if she was overwhelmed by the new life that was thrust upon her, or if it was the growing feelings she had for Alexander that left her confused. I don't know where I fit in," she admitted softly, her eyes meeting his. "I've never been part of something like this. I was never meant for this kind of life. I was just a burden to my family." Alexander's expression softened. He moved closer, his presence warm and comforting, but there was also an intensity in his eyes, a hunger that seemed to reach into her soul. He knelt beside her, his gaze never leaving hers. "You are not a burden," he said firmly. "You are my mate. You are the one who healed me, the one who saved me. In my eyes, you are everything." His words were simple, but they held a weight that made Sarah's heart skip. She had never heard such words before, not from anyone. Her entire life had been defined by rejection, by being cast aside. But here, with him, she could feel something different, a sense of belonging, of purpose she had never known. She wasn't just some outcast anymore. She was his. The fire crackled between them, and for a moment, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. She had been searching for a place in the world, and maybe, just maybe, she had found it in the arms of the Alpha King. But as the night wore on, she couldn't ignore the looming question. Was she truly ready for this new life? For a future with Alexander? A future that would change everything she had ever known? The uncertainty lingered, but it was something she would have to face in time. Because now, there was no turning back. Days passed by in a haze for Sarah as she tried to adjust to her new reality. The grand halls of the castle were both awe-inspiring and suffocating. She had never been accustomed to such wealth, such grandeur, and yet it all felt so distant, so unfamiliar. She was a simple Omega, and nothing in her past had prepared her for the life she was now expected to lead. The king's presence was overwhelming, a constant reminder of the power and authority that surrounded her. His golden eyes watched her closely, and though he never spoke a word of it, she could feel his gaze on her at all times. Sarah had always been invisible, just a shadow in her family, but now, it seemed like everything about her mattered. Every step she took, every word she said, seemed to carry weight. Alexander had claimed her, and yet, she still wondered if she truly belonged here. It wasn't just the grandeur of the castle that unsettled her. It was the unknown that lingered in the air between her and Alexander. She couldn't deny the connection they shared, the bond that had been formed when she healed him. But she couldn't help but question everything. What if this wasn't really love? What if he was just bound by fate, forced to be with her because of some ancient law or curse? And what about herself? Was she truly ready to embrace this new life, to stand beside him as his mate, as Luna? One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the castle's gardens, Sarah found herself walking through the rose-filled courtyard. The scent of blooming flowers filled the air, but even their sweetness couldn't mask the doubts swirling inside her. She paused by the fountain, her fingers lightly brushing the cool stone. "I never imagined I'd be here," she whispered to herself, her reflection staring back at her in the water. A soft rustle behind her made her turn. There, standing at the edge of the courtyard, was Alexander. His usual regal demeanor was softened by the way he watched her, his expression unreadable but filled with something she couldn't quite place. "You've been distant," he said, his voice low and calm. Sarah looked down, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I'm just trying to adjust," she replied quietly. "This is all so new to me. I don't know where I fit in all of this." Alexander took a step forward, his presence almost magnetic. "You fit right where you are," he said, his golden eyes never leaving hers. "You are my mate, Sarah. That's all that matters. Everything else will fall into place." His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made Sarah's heart race. She had heard him say those words before, but this time, they felt different. This time, she believed him. For the first time since she arrived at the castle, Sarah felt the truth of his words. She wasn't just some Omega, some rejected outcast. She was his. And that meant everything. But still, the doubts lingered. "But what if I'm not what you need?" she asked softly, her voice trembling slightly. "What if I'm just not enough?" Alexander's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to her. "Sarah, you are everything I've ever needed. You healed me. You saved me. I would not be standing here without you." His words, sincere and steady, melted away the last of her uncertainty. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she saw not just the Alpha King but the man who had suffered, who had fought, and who had found his salvation in her. And she realized, in that moment, that she had found her salvation in him as well. She didn't need to be perfect. She didn't need to have all the answers. All she needed was to be with him, to be his mate, to stand by his side as they faced whatever the future held. The doubts faded, replaced by a quiet confidence she had never known before. Sarah knew now that she was where she was meant to be. She belonged here. She belonged with Alexander. And with that realization, she took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Alexander reached out, his hand finding hers, and in that simple touch, Sarah felt her heart settle. She was no longer lost. She had found her place, her purpose, and it was with him. The next few days passed in a blur of emotions for Sarah as she began to adjust to her new life beside Alexander. Her heart had slowly started to accept the truth of their bond, but there were still moments of doubt. She had been raised to believe that she was worthless, cast aside by her family and society. Now, with the Alpha King by her side, everything had changed, but she still wondered if she was truly worthy of this life. As she wandered the castle halls, Sarah couldn't help but notice how different everything felt. The walls, once cold and intimidating, now seemed to embrace her. The servants, who once looked at her with pity, now greeted her with respect. She was the mate of the Alpha King, the one who had healed him, and that changed everything. Yet, despite all the changes, the one thing that remained constant was Alexander. He had been kind, gentle, and understanding, but there was still a part of him she didn't fully understand. He had been through so much: his curse, the battles, the isolation. Sarah could feel the weight of his past every time he looked at her, as though he was waiting for something. As the days turned into weeks, Alexander continued to be the steady presence she had always longed for. He never pushed her, never rushed her to accept their bond completely. He gave her space to come to terms with everything, but he was always there when she needed him. One evening, Sarah found herself in the castle's library, surrounded by books she had never dared to touch before. The ancient tomes lined the walls, their pages filled with knowledge, magic, and history. It was here, in this quiet sanctuary, that Sarah often found solace. She had always been curious, and now, more than ever, she wanted to learn. She wanted to understand her place in this world, in Alexander's world. She was still an Omega, still the girl who had been abandoned, but in this moment, she realized something. She was not just an Omega anymore. She was his mate, his equal, and she had a role to play in this world. As she flipped through the pages of a book on the history of their kind, she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found Alexander standing in the doorway, his eyes soft but knowing. "You've been spending a lot of time in here," he remarked, stepping inside. Sarah smiled softly, closing the book in front of her. "There's so much to learn," she said. "I never realized how little I knew. I want to understand everything, about this world, about our people, about us." Alexander moved closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You are already learning," he said, his voice low and steady. "You are more than just my mate. You are the future of this kingdom, and you have a place here. I have always known that. But now, it's time for you to see it, too." His words settled into her heart like a warm fire, igniting something deep within her. She had never thought of herself as important, never believed that she could have a role in something as grand as this. But now, with Alexander's support, she was beginning to believe it. As the days turned into months, Sarah's confidence grew. She learned the ways of the pack, the politics of the kingdom, and the history of the Alpha Kings. She stood beside Alexander at official events, her presence no longer a mere symbol of weakness but a testament to their bond. Together, they faced the challenges that came with their roles, and Sarah learned that being with Alexander was more than just being loved. It was about becoming a team, two halves of a whole. One day, as Sarah stood at the balcony of the castle, looking out over the vast expanse of their kingdom, she realized something. She had come a long way from the girl who had once been abandoned. She was no longer lost, no longer uncertain. She had found her place, and it was beside Alexander. She was not just his mate. She was his equal, his partner in everything. And for the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly at peace. The days that followed Sarah's realization were filled with a new sense of purpose. She no longer felt like the same broken girl who had wandered through the halls of the castle in confusion. She had found her place, and it was beside Alexander. The bond they shared was growing stronger each day, and Sarah was learning what it truly meant to be his mate, not just in name, but in spirit. Alexander had always been a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He would often take Sarah with him to the farthest corners of the kingdom, showing her the lands that would one day be hers to protect. Together, they traveled through lush forests, over rolling hills, and across peaceful rivers. She began to understand the depth of his rule, the responsibility he carried on his broad shoulders. The weight of the crown was not just a symbol of power. It was a constant reminder of the sacrifices that had been made to keep the kingdom alive. And as they walked side by side, Sarah saw the gentler side of Alexander, the one that only those closest to him could witness. He was not the cold, distant Alpha King that the world had come to know. No, he was a man who had endured immense pain, who had been shaped by the trials of life. As they spent more time together, Sarah found herself opening up to him in ways she never thought possible. She shared her hopes, her fears, and the pain she had carried with her for so long. Alexander listened, offering comfort with just a touch or a few carefully chosen words. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outcast. She felt seen, valued, and loved. But despite their growing connection, Sarah still held on to the part of herself that feared she was not enough. Alexander's strength was undeniable, and his leadership was unquestioned. She wondered if, one day, she would be able to live up to the expectations placed on her as his mate. It wasn't long before Alexander sensed her hesitation. One evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the kingdom, the moonlight casting a silver glow over the landscape, he spoke. "Sarah," he began, his voice gentle, "you are more than enough. You are exactly what I need. You are not just my mate, you are my partner. In everything. I have seen the way you've grown, the way you've embraced this new life. And I could not be more proud." His words, spoken so simply, yet with such sincerity, made Sarah's heart swell. She had always feared that she would never measure up, that she would always be the broken girl in the shadows. But now, in this moment, she understood. She was not broken. She was whole. And she was exactly who Alexander needed by his side. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's confidence continued to grow. She began to take on more responsibilities, helping Alexander with matters of the kingdom. Her once limited understanding of their world expanded, and she found herself stepping into her role as Luna with grace and strength. One day, as they sat together in the castle's grand hall, discussing matters of diplomacy, Sarah felt a sense of pride swell within her. She had never imagined that she would be here, by Alexander's side, playing such an important role in the kingdom. And yet, here she was, a woman who had once been abandoned, now standing strong beside the Alpha King. She realized, with a clarity that struck her heart, that this was where she belonged. This was the life she had been destined for. She had come so far from the broken Omega who had once walked through the castle halls in fear. And now, as she looked at Alexander, she knew one thing for certain. Together, they would face whatever challenges the future held. Together, they were unstoppable. As Sarah continued to embrace her new life as Luna, the weight of her responsibilities began to settle in. Her bond with Alexander had only grown stronger with each passing day, and she no longer saw herself as the girl who had been abandoned. The Omega who had once been invisible, cast aside by her family, was now at the heart of the kingdom, standing by the Alpha King's side. But with this new life came new challenges. The people of the kingdom, the pack, had always respected Alexander. They had always looked to him for guidance and strength. But now, they were watching her, too. As the days passed, Sarah found herself growing into her role. She worked alongside Alexander, learning the intricacies of governing the kingdom. There were meetings, decisions, and discussions that required both their attention. It was a far cry from the lonely days she had spent in the woods, and she found herself relishing the purpose that her new life brought. But even in the midst of her growing confidence, there were moments of doubt. She had never been prepared for this. The Omega who had been pushed aside was now expected to take on such immense responsibility. And though Alexander was always there, guiding her, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was still not enough. It was in those moments that Alexander's presence became her anchor. One evening, as the sun set over the kingdom, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah stood alone on the balcony, looking out over the land that was now hers to protect. The winds whispered through the trees, carrying with them the sounds of the kingdom settling into the quiet of night. Alexander appeared beside her, his presence warm and familiar. He didn't speak at first, just stood there beside her, offering her the comfort of his silence. It wasn't until Sarah turned to face him that he spoke. "You've been distant lately," he said softly, his voice steady. Sarah sighed, her shoulders heavy with the weight of her thoughts. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this," she admitted. "I was never meant to lead. I was never meant to be anything but the girl who was abandoned." Alexander's gaze softened, and he reached out, placing his hand gently on hers. "You are more than capable," he said, his voice filled with the certainty that had always been there when he spoke to her. "You've proven that every day since we met. You saved me when I was lost. You've helped me rebuild this kingdom, and you've done so with strength and grace." Sarah shook her head, still uncertain. "But I'm not you," she said quietly. "I don't have your power, your strength. I'm still the girl who was rejected." Alexander's expression softened even more, and he stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her chin. "You are everything I need," he said. "You are not just my mate. You are my partner, my equal. And you have proven time and time again that you are more than capable of leading alongside me." His words, so simple yet so powerful, made Sarah's heart swell. In that moment, she realized that it wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about having the same strength as Alexander. It was about being true to herself, about embracing the person she had become, and trusting that together, they could face anything. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with determination. "I'll never be perfect," she said, her voice steady. "But I'll be the best I can be. For you. For this kingdom. For us." Alexander smiled, his golden eyes warm and proud. "That's all I ask for," he said softly. And in that moment, Sarah knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would never be alone. Together, they would face everything that came their way. As the seasons changed, so did Sarah's life. Her bond with Alexander had deepened, and her role as Luna had become a part of her. She was no longer the unsure, broken girl who had wandered through the castle in confusion. She had grown into her strength, learning from Alexander, learning from herself. Together, they had faced challenges that had tested their relationship, but they always came out stronger. The kingdom was thriving under their leadership, and Sarah had found a sense of purpose she had never imagined possible. Yet, despite everything, there was still a part of Sarah that struggled. The pressure of being the mate of the Alpha King, the weight of the expectations placed on her, still lingered. She wasn't sure if she would ever be free of the nagging doubts that sometimes crept into her heart. One afternoon, as she sat in the grand library of the castle, flipping through the ancient texts, she heard footsteps behind her. Looking up, she saw Alexander standing in the doorway, his golden eyes watching her with an intensity that always made her heart race. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice warm, but with an undercurrent of concern. Sarah smiled softly, closing the book in her hands. "I'm just thinking," she replied. "I sometimes wonder if I'm doing enough. If I'm the right person for this role." Alexander walked over to her, his presence filling the room. He knelt beside her, his hand gently resting on hers. "You are everything I need, Sarah. You always have been. You're not just my mate. You're my partner. You help lead this kingdom with wisdom and strength." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had built together. Sarah felt the warmth of his touch and the sincerity in his voice, and for a moment, the doubts began to fade. She had never felt more at peace. "I want to be the best I can be," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "For you, for the kingdom, for all of us. But sometimes, I wonder if I'll ever truly be enough." Alexander lifted her chin gently, making her meet his gaze. "Sarah," he said softly, "you are more than enough. You have been from the moment I met you, and you will always be enough. Never doubt that." His words sank deep into her heart, and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude, of love. In that moment, she realized something that had eluded her for so long. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about meeting some ideal of what a Luna should be. It was about being true to herself, to the person she had become. And she was becoming someone she was proud of. The kingdom, the people, Alexander. This was her life now, and she was ready to embrace it fully. As the days passed, Sarah became more involved in the kingdom's affairs, working side by side with Alexander to ensure its prosperity. She took on responsibilities with confidence, her growing knowledge and leadership skills becoming a cornerstone of their rule. But it wasn't just about politics or power. It was about the connection they shared, the love that had blossomed between them. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with. As Sarah stood beside Alexander on the balcony one evening, looking out over the kingdom they had built together, she felt a deep sense of peace. The sun was setting, casting the land in golden hues, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she truly belonged. "We've come a long way," Sarah said softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Alexander stood beside her, his presence as steady as ever. "We have," he replied, his voice filled with pride. "And we'll continue to grow, together." Sarah smiled, feeling the weight of her responsibilities lighten with every passing moment. She was no longer the girl who had been abandoned. She was Sarah Whitlock, Luna, and the maid of the Alpha King. And as she stood there, beside the man she loved, she knew that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together, because they were unstoppable, and she was finally ready to embrace the life she had been destined for. As Sarah stood at the window overlooking the sprawling kingdom, a sense of tranquility washed over her. The sun had just begun to set, casting a soft golden glow over the land. The once unfamiliar landscape had become her home, a place she now felt deeply connected to. The weight of the responsibilities she carried had become a part of her, but so had the love she shared with Alexander. The journey from the girl who had been abandoned to the Luna of the kingdom had been long, but every step had led her to this moment, standing side by side with the man she had come to love more than she ever thought possible. She felt him approach before she saw him. His presence was always undeniable, like a force that gently enveloped her. She turned to find Alexander standing behind her, his golden eyes soft and filled with warmth. He had been her constant support, her protector, and in many ways, her guide. But now, he was also her equal. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander smiled, his gaze never leaving her. "It is," he replied, "but not as beautiful as what we've built together." Sarah felt a flutter in her chest at his words. "We've come a long way," she said, her thoughts drifting back to the days when she had felt lost and uncertain. She had never imagined that she would be here, in this place, with this life. Alexander stepped closer, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You've grown more than you know," he said softly. "And you've proven, day by day, that you are more than capable of being the Luna of this kingdom." Sarah shook her head, her heart swelling with emotion. "I didn't do it alone," she said, her voice steady but filled with gratitude. "You were with me every step of the way." Alexander's smile deepened, and he pulled her into his arms. For a moment, they stood there in the quiet of the evening, holding each other. The world outside seemed to fade, and in that moment, it was just the two of them, connected by more than just their roles. They were partners, in every sense of the word. "We are ready for whatever comes next," Alexander said, his voice firm and filled with confidence. "Together, we will face anything, and we will continue to grow, continue to build this kingdom into something that will last for generations." Sarah looked up at him, her heart full of love and determination. "Together," she echoed, feeling the truth of his words deep within her. "We are unstoppable. The days that followed were filled with new challenges, but Sarah no longer faced them with fear. She faced them with the strength that had been within her all along. She had found her place, not just as the mate of the Alpha King, but as a leader in her own right. With Alexander by her side, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. And as they continued their journey together, Sarah knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Together, they would write the future of their kingdom, one step at a time. As time continued to pass, Sarah and Alexander grew even closer, their bond becoming a force that no one in the kingdom could ignore. Sarah had learned to embrace her role as Luna, not only because she loved Alexander, but because she had come to believe in her own strength. She was no longer the uncertain girl who had once felt abandoned. She was now a partner, a leader, and most importantly, she had found her place in the world. Together, Sarah and Alexander navigated the complexities of ruling the kingdom. They made decisions, faced challenges, and celebrated victories. There were moments of tension, of course, moments when the weight of their responsibilities threatened to pull them apart. But each time, they returned to each other, stronger and more united. One particular evening, as the stars twinkled above and the moon cast a soft glow across the kingdom, Sarah found herself standing on the balcony once more, looking out at the land that was now hers to protect. She could feel Alexander's presence behind her, a comforting warmth that had become as familiar as the very air she breathed. "It's hard to believe how far we've come," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper, as if speaking the words out loud would somehow make them more real. Alexander stepped up beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. "We've come a long way," he agreed, his voice calm and steady, "and we still have so much ahead of us." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. The kingdom had prospered under their rule, and though there were still obstacles to face, she felt more confident than ever that they would overcome them. They had faced their fears, their doubts, and had come out the other side stronger. Together, they had built something that would last. "I never thought I'd be here," Sarah confessed, her eyes scanning the horizon. "I never thought I'd find a place where I truly belonged." Alexander turned toward her, his golden eyes filled with warmth and understanding. "You belong here," he said softly, his hand gently cupping her chin. "With me, with this kingdom. You have always belonged here, Sarah." His words settled deep within her, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt completely at peace. She wasn't just his mate, she was his equal, his partner. And together, they had created something remarkable. As they stood there, side by side, looking out over the kingdom they had built together, Sarah realized something. This was where she was meant to be. She had found her purpose, her strength, and her love. The future was uncertain, as it always is, but with Alexander by her side, Sarah knew she was ready for whatever came next. She was no longer the girl who had been abandoned. She was Sarah Whitlock, Luna of the Northern Territories, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together with Alexander, she knew they could accomplish anything. Their love, their bond, was unbreakable. And as the stars shimmered above, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude and hope for the future they would continue to build together.